Let's crack open a beer and share some thoughts.
Hello and welcome to Beer Nation 2020. I'm Emma Inch and I'm joined in a virtual way, of course, by the very cream of British beer podcasting to share some thoughts about the drink and the industry that we love. Doing anything like this in this particularly strange year takes on a sort of a significance beyond the nuts and bolts of the discussion itself. We're living through this global pandemic. And in a year that none of us have experienced before, and hopefully we never will again. And hopefully today's discussion can do justice to some of the challenges, some of the learning opportunities, and perhaps some of the hopes for the future that we all have. So before we go any further, obviously I'm going to let everyone introduce themselves. We're a big group, so we're going to keep it quite brief. So I'm going to start off with the guys who've managed to pull all this together and have managed to get us virtually sat round the table. I'm going to start with the Beer O'Clock Show guys. So Steve, introduce yourself.
I'm Steve from Beer O'Clock Show, Hopinions. I'm, as people know, I'm based in Essex, and I've gone for a local brewery today who are just a couple of miles down the road from me, a brewery called Bishop Nick. The head brewer there is a original descendant from the original Ridley's brewery, which is now owned by Green King. So they're not allowed to use any of the original beer names that they used to have, but he's set up a new brewery under the Bishop Nick moniker. And I'm on their seasonal offering, which is a strong, rich ale at 7.5%, kind of a barley wine winter warmer hybrid, and it's actually really lovely. Lots of fruitcake flavours going on there. And
there's another Beer O'Clock guy lurking. Martin, introduce yourself.
Hello everyone, Martin, Beer O'Clock Show, co-host to Steve, and just to throw in a little bit of credit where credit's due, most of the pulling together is definitely done by Steve rather than me, so thank you Steve for kicking this off for us. I'm also based in Essex, and I am drinking a beer from Leigh-on-Sea, who are a brewery I've mentioned a couple of times on the Beer O'Clock Show, and it's the Legra Pale, 3.8%, Citra only hop, bitter, piney, delicious, especially after 4 days off the booze.
Excellent. Yes, I love Leigh-on-Sea beers, and I love their branding as well, that nice little shell shape. It's so cute.
It's really good. It is really good.
Really good. Right, I'm moving on to Men Beerhaving Badly. Hopefully you are going to all behave well today. I'm going to start at the top of my screen. Mark.
Oh, hi there. It's Mark from Men Beerhaving Badly here, coming in from lovely North Leicestershire, just outside of Loughborough. And I've kind of gone half local with my beer choice. I've got the collaboration from Emperor's Brewery from Colville here in Leicestershire, and Ampersand from Norfolk. I've gone for their Mockalorian Mocha Imperial Stout. Why I've decided to have a 10.5% at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, who knows? But I'm sure it is a fantastic beer. So.
Oh, and you're lucky to get your hands on some of that Emperor's Brewery, aren't you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, it's like gold dust, isn't it?
Yes.
Excellent. So, Tom.
Hi, everyone. Tom from Men Behaving Badly. I'm in South Leicestershire, Market Harbour, and I am drinking Braybrook's most recent offering, I think, is their Pills. They're just a couple of miles down the road from me, actually just over the border in Northants. Obviously produce some fantastic lagers, and their Pills is just as good. Only just tried it a few minutes ago, but it's tasting nice and crisp, refreshing, just what I need, and just a bit more kind of bitter and hoppier than their other offerings as well. So yeah, a great start.
Excellent. And the third Man Behaving Badly, Ashley.
Hi everyone. I feel like this is going to be a slight carbon copy of exactly what Tom just said, because not only am I also in Market Harbour, I'm also drinking Braybrook's latest, the Pills. So thinking of it as kind of like their session lager's big sister, because it is all of those kind of characteristic notes, but with a bit more oomph. So 100% Franconian malts and 5 hops. Really lovely, really complex.
Excellent. So now moving on to Rhythm and Brews. Luke.
Hi, Luke from Rhythm and Brews, based in North Hertfordshire in Hitchin. Unfortunately, I haven't gone for a local. I've gone as far away from local as I could with the Sour Grinch from Overworks, which is a chocolate cranberry and hazelnut sour, because, you know, festive, which is like a weird combination of a really nice chocolate milk stout and a Berliner Weiss. which, is an experience.
Excellent. And Andrew?
Oh, it's Andrew here, the other half of Rhythm and Brews. We're the podcast that does the music matching to beers in a sort of semi-formal sense. We've been recording on I had to look this up. November 2016, Luke. That's over 4 years now. I don't know how you haven't divorced me yet. What am I drinking? Not that local, but it is from the south, from Tunbridge Wells. It's Good Things Brewing Company. Drinking their double dry hop pale ale called Enki, Simcoe and Laurel hops. And it's really good. It's 4.5%. I think I made the sensible decision rather than going for the imperial stouts at 2:00 in the afternoon. Very refreshing, citrusy, passion fruit. And I wanted to give them a shout out, partly because I've been discovering all sorts of new breweries during lockdown, but they're claiming to be the first UK closed loop brewery. So they're all about the sustainability. And I thought, if for no other reason, they deserve a shout out.
Absolutely. They're a great bunch of people, and they're doing some really transformational work with sustainability down there. Fantastic. Now, the only two people who not social distancing, Simon and Vicki, you introduce yourselves.
Hi, Simon here from Beers Without Frontiers podcast, based in the Midlands, or South Warwickshire to be precise. I'm drinking an Attic Brewco beer called Supernaut, named after a Black Sabbath song, appropriately, because they're from Sturchley in Birmingham. And it is a 4.1% straight stout, really, which is, and I guess at that percentage, sessionable. And it's just a straight up kind of stout of the type that you don't get that often these days. It's none of this pastry kind of business. So it's just roasty chocolate notes and stuff. And at that ABV, you can it's pintable. So that's what I'm on.
And just to confirm, we're not breaking social distancing rules. We're not breaking tier 3 rules. We do actually live together. So just in case, thought I'd better clear that up. I'm also on Attic, and I'm on Attic Brewco, and I'm drinking Forged Dark Mild, and does exactly what it says on the tin. It's a lovely mild. It's and it's 4.3%. So I'm going slightly stronger than Simon today.
Excellent. And you've got a Beers Without Frontiers colleague as well, Charles.
Hello. Yes, it's Charles from Beers Without Frontiers, one of the co-hosts. I live in Warwick, so just outside of Leamington Spa. And the brewery that I'm drinking at the minute is a brewery we've actually featured on the show before, which is Attic. And this is a beer called Go With The Flow, 5.1% West Coast Common, which is a really interesting sort of take, really, on a hybrid between a West Coast IPA and a Californian Common. It's lovely. Yeah, thanks for having me.
And then we've got Sheffield Hopcast, Laura.
Hello, I'm Laura from Sheffield Hopcast, probably unsurprisingly based in Sheffield. Slight spoiler in the name of the podcast there. I have actually gone for a Yorkshire brewery, but not one of our most local ones. I've chosen a beer from Bad Seed, based in Malton, just up from York. Dark Forest Theory. It's a 5.5% chocolate and cherry stout. Absolutely delicious, sort of really, really well-bodied, rich stout with just a little hint of sweet tartness from the cherries. That's in really nice balance. So I just thought I'd give those a shout out. One of my very favourite breweries, and not one that you tend to see around all of that much outside of York. So that's why I've chosen that one.
Excellent. And a lot of people are going for these stouts and Christmassy flavours, so that's great. And some Christmas jumpers even. We'll get to that in a minute. And Adam from Sheffield Hopcast.
Hi, I'm Adam. I'm 38 and a half years old, and I'm also from Sheffield. One quarter of the Sheffield Hopcast, which has been going about I think it's about 3 years actually now. Kind of locally focused, but with a reach nationally as well. So, and today I'm keeping it local with an American twist. So we've got St. Mars of the Desert, Bon Vive, which is a cool ship IPA, 5.4%. Kind of a brew that's probably making a little bit of more waves this year or in the last year or so, getting out there into the world. But yeah, it kind of was one of our kind of best kept secrets for a while. So I've always liked to keep an eye out for a St. Mars beer.
Absolutely. We hear a lot about that beer, but I haven't managed to get my hands on about that brewery, but I haven't managed to get my hands on any yet. Now you're just drinking it into the microphone to make me...
Sorry.
And finally, with Christmas jumper on and ready, it's Nat.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nat. I'm a London-based beer educator, author, and host of the Beer With Nat podcast. And while I am wearing Christmas gear, I've already drank all my Christmas beers. So I have a lime Berliner Weiss from Wildcard, so a nice local selection. It's 4%, so I thought, again, a good afternoon beer. It's really limey, really zesty and tart, so it's really fun to drink. I'm really enjoying it. And I picked it as well as a little shout out to Jaga Weiss, who's their head brewer. Not only is she an award-winning head brewer, she's an award-winning beer communicator, and she was my first ever guest on Beer With Nat. So I wanted to give her a little nod.
Excellent. And yeah, she's just won Best Beer Broadcaster. So we're going to talk a bit about beer broadcasting later, aren't we? But yeah, Jaga's right up there with that. And just in case people don't know, I'm based down in Brighton, and the beer I've chosen is a local Brighton beer. I've chosen a collaboration between Umbard, one of our local breweries, and Bison Beer, who both brew beer and sell beer in their shops and in their bars. And this is their Rocktober IPL, and it's 5.2%. It's got a nice picture of a bison on the front, and it's just perfect for kind of getting me in the mood this afternoon. And Umbard, an amazing brewery. Jordan Mower is the head brewer. He set up in his garden shed. I brewed with him years ago in his garden shed, actually, and now has a beautiful tap room in Brighton that sadly hasn't been able to open, obviously, in this period, but they're still selling their beers out of there. So that's fantastic. So that is everyone. There are a lot of us. But we're going to keep things tight and interesting. But what I'm interested in to start with is from you, Steve, about kind of why we're here and where this has come from. You've done this kind of thing before, haven't you?
Yeah, once before. So I've been podcasting for 8 years now. And 5 years ago, we decided to bring together the then podcasts in the UK that were focusing on beer. And to say that you could probably count them on one hand is an understatement. But there were half a dozen of us sat round a table upstairs in a pub in North London, and basically we were discussing the state of the beer nation, essentially, back in 2015. And then obviously as 2020 rolled around, and with everything that's gone this year, I thought, you know what, beer podcasting is in a great place in the UK right now. We're up to sort of like 50 plus beer podcasts that are available for consumers to listen to, and wouldn't it be great if we repeated the Beer Nation concept, but brought together more of those beer podcasts? And as everybody is now well versed with doing things online and via Zoom, and you know, very much used to this sort of setup, now would be the ideal time to do it, actually, and to take it as how have things moved on since 2015. So back in 2015, some of the key things that we were discussing at that first Beer Nation are probably still some of the things that may come up today, but in a very different way. So one of the things that came up again and again during that original discussion was the word Wetherspoons, and whether it was a dirty word or not. I think views may have changed on that significantly, but it did come up repeatedly. There were phrases used like the craft beer revolution, which I think if we go back 5 years ago, it was probably just when the tide was beginning to turn in terms of the amount of craft beer that was available. There was lots of discussion around the availability and the choice of beer. And there was also quite a bit of discussion around the role that social media has to play in beer, and in particular, the role of Untapped within that. And obviously, sort of 5 years on, we've seen Untapped grow significantly. So it does still play quite a significant role. One of the key things that was mentioned was there was some discussion around some of the buyouts that had happened that year. And one of the big ones was the ABI and the SAB merger, which at the time was huge. Those two giants of beer in the world coming together. And I know they've since had to split up and sell off a few concerns to satisfy the Monopolies Commission. And the key event that had happened that year to actually trigger that was the sale of Lagunitas, which at the time was quite a significant point, because the former owner had always been quite vocal that he would never sell his brewery until the right amount of money was written on a check, I guess, and then he was quite happy to let it go. We also kind of started to look at what were the things that were a bit of a revelation in 2015, and this is a really interesting list for me. So tap rooms, apparently they were new 5 years ago. There weren't many of those, and people were getting very excited about the fact that they could go to a brewery and actually drink at the brewery. Canning lines and the quality of canned beer in 2015, gluten-free beers, and one of the biggest revelations of 2015 was the word Cloudwater as well, because they were just starting, they were just finding their feet, and look how far they've come in the last 5 years. So yeah, it was quite exciting to sit round a table back then with half a dozen people, and it's equally as exciting right now to sit virtually round a table with a dozen other people and to kind of revisit this Beer Nation concept, but to put it in the realms of 2020.
I think you're. I mean, I was just thinking when you said it was quite exciting to sit round a table with other people, how exciting it would be to sit round a table with other people. But it is just as exciting, as you say, to be on Zoom. But it's interesting, that list of things that you've said you were talking about. The phrase craft beer revolution, you might occasionally still see it in the mainstream non-beer press, but it's not something I guess we would ever really mention anymore, is it? It's kind of, we're just in a different place.
Yeah, it does feel like it's a very different place now. And having had that benefit of hindsight of being involved in both of these, and certainly when I went back and listened to that original Beer Nation in 2015, I was very surprised in terms of some of the discussions that were happening. I think one of the things that really sums it up for me, there was a quote from Daniel Nilsson from Original Gravity, who was involved back in that original recording, and he kind of signed off that Beer Nation in 2015 by saying, hopefully another 10 people will be sat around this table this time next year. Well, it's taken us 5 years to get there, but we've got those 10 people sat around the table now.
Absolutely, and I think you've definitely chosen the right year to do it. But I think just hearing those things, I think maybe we can open up the conversation a bit at this point about hearing how much, when we think about it, beer really has changed in the past 5 years. When we think at that point, you were talking about the beginnings of Cloudwater when they were still kind of slightly under the radar. You're talking about a lot about buyouts, a lot about the newness of canning. I think I saw some of the beers as you held them up, but I think most of us here had a can rather than a bottle, from what I can remember. What do people think? What for other people is perhaps the biggest change since 2015, the most obvious change in the beer scene since 2015?
I suppose for me, as Andrew said, we've been podcasting for 4 years, and so when we started off, which was sort of really one of my introductions to craft beer, I used to get excited going into a pub and seeing like Lagunitas or a Sierra Nevada or a Blue Moon, right? That was the extent of craft beer in most pubs that you walked into sort of 4 or 5 years ago. Now the fact that you can go in and you can get such an amazing range of not only breweries but also styles, like in the fact that everybody mainstream, what were niche styles are now becoming a lot more mainstream, and you've got sours on supermarket shelves now. I think it's just phenomenal that it's just become such a big boom, I suppose.
Andrew, did you have your hand up?
It was just, Luke's kind of stolen my thunder. I was just going to talk about the variety, really. When I think back to what I was drinking 4 years ago, and it was probably more traditional ales and bitters, probably because that's what was available in the pubs I was going into. So not only has the variety escalated massively, the options of where you can buy it have grown massively. So even a local pub now will have Beavertown on, for example, which it wouldn't have typically. And we will talk about supermarkets later, but obviously that's the availability, I think, generally, and that's I see that as a good thing over the last 5 years. It's introduced people such as me to some great beer, and everyone's got to start somewhere. So if it's in front of you in lots of different outlets, that's a good option for me.
Absolutely, yeah. The availability is so totally different than it was 5 years ago, isn't it? But what about what we're actually drinking, the styles that we're drinking, or even the styles that we even know about? Adam?
Yeah, the one thing that kind of always keeps coming back when I think about 5 years ago is, I imagine a lot of people are kind of IPA drinkers, and that is kind of the poster person of the beer world. But 5 years ago, it was very heavily West Coast style. You could see through your beers, and then up until probably the last year, you just didn't see West Coast IPAs at all. And if you could see through it, people were starting to go, oh, well, that's not very craft, is it? But yeah, just kind of one part of the style changes, I suppose. But there's lots to talk about. You're
absolutely right. I'm the kind of person who, if I have an IPA, I want it to smack me around the face and rip my throat out with bitterness, and I have missed that. But it's creeping back, isn't it? As you say,
it is creeping back. Yeah.
Nat, I'm just going to pounce on you a little bit. As a beer educator, you talk about beer styles all the time. Do you think the range of styles that people are aware of and getting access to has that grown?
Oh my goodness, yes, it's been incredible. And I think to Luke's point, it's the idea of sour beers that really were not on most people's radar. And, 5 years ago, just speaking about my personal journey, I was an interested, consumer, and I started working in the industry in 2015. So being now on the inside of it and seeing how it's changed, and as you said, speaking to people about beer, it really is this idea of opening up our eyes to what beer can be. For so many people, beer is lager. But realizing that there's this whole other world of ales out there, which is where most of us come in as craft beer fans, of course, with the IPA being the main one, or pale ales in America in particular. But realizing there's this whole world of mixed fermentation beers, not only the classic Belgian versions, which are sometimes a bit too much for, the newest folks because they've got all that funky character going on, but really having these nice sort of accessible Berliner Weiss and Gosa styles that have loads of different fruits added into them. I have friends who have told me, I'm not a beer drinker, you're never going to win me over. And a Gosa or a Berliner Weiss has done it. So yeah, it's been really incredible the amount of new people we can bring into the industry through these new flavors and styles.
Absolutely, that's a really good point. Yeah, people who don't think they like beer. Yeah, Laura.
I think just to kind of expand on what everyone else has said, really, I completely agree. And I think for me, the extension of styles that are readily available has been a really key change. But I think as well as that, it's the language that people use to describe it, and I think that's something that will probably continue as well. Your average beer drinker now understands what mosaic hops are, whereas 5 years ago they might have only used just distinguish between a pale ale and an IPA. So now kind of people are becoming more interested in what's actually in their beer and what it is that they like about it. And I think it's all kind of tied in with the choice that's available, and that kind of thing is people understanding a little bit more what's in their glass too.
Absolutely. And I suppose there's a change, as Steve mentioned at the start, and that in the 2015 you were talking about tap rooms being completely new. Now we've had an odd year, which we're going to move on to in a minute, but tap rooms now is something that's so familiar to us, isn't it? And many of you have talked about local breweries and getting, visiting your local breweries, knowing your local breweries. That seems to be far more prevalent now as well. Who's got a favourite tap room? Mark?
I think in terms of favourite tap rooms, most recently for me, I've got to say Round Corner Brewery in Melton Mowbray. Their tap room is just absolutely outstanding, and it's just been somewhat of a godsend this year, the times that it has been able to open, and even when it's not open, they do terrific stuff. And I think the idea of idea of buying online as well this year, particularly this year with everything that's happened, it's just grown exponentially. Purchasing online, I know that it's strange to kind of look at local breweries and feel like you have to buy them online, but that's the sort of year that we've had. So to be able to still support those breweries like that has been fantastic. But yeah, Round Corner's tap room especially has just been absolutely fantastic over the last couple of years. Definitely one of my favourites.
Excellent. And I think that's it's almost like we've done a kind of a full circle with drinking in pubs and then going back to drinking at source, actually drinking the beer fresh from the tank. It's one of the best ways to drink in my opinion. Let's ignore the situation no longer. We are in an unusual year, in a strange year like no other. It's been a mix of lockdowns, of restrictions, of different restrictions for different areas, different impacts on the industry. A year that hospitality and brewing will never forget. Who wants to take on COVID? Who wants to kind of have a bit of a talk about how it's affected them, how they drink, what they've seen in the industry?
Let's jump straight in and say what a shit year this has been for pubs. I I mean, they really are suffering, and probably will continue to suffer well into 2021. They've been through 2 lockdowns. They've had various restrictions imposed. We've had a tier system in England, levels in Scotland, fire breaks in Wales, and the focus most of the time has been on hospitality, increasingly in the latter part of the year on hospitality, to the extent where it definitely feels like it's an industry that's been scapegoated with very little evidence to support the prohibitions that have been set against it. And it makes you sometimes wonder whether the government has some sort of implied temperance agenda going on with the actions they've been taking against alcohol generally. So they're suffering. December should be, we're recording this December should be one of the big months for pubs. They get a fair substantial chunk of their turnover in December, and yet most of them are either closed or are massively down on turnover because they can only host people if they're having meals at the same time. So for whatever rationale the government has decided, that's going to prevent everyone getting COVID. So it's desperate times for the industry, and I think whilst in the first lockdown they were possibly all feeling everyone was in it together, lots of businesses were suffering, communities were being sensible. This time around it feels like they're definitely having the finger pointed at them unjustifiably. And it'll be interesting just to see how they manage to survive it going into 2021. I suspect we're going to be seeing pub numbers come down again. We're probably going to see a massive lag in people going back to the pub. I think all of this publicity and finger pointing around pubs knocks consumer confidence as well. There are lots of people that are still not necessarily very comfortable to go back to a pub. And so there's going to be a long lag time, I think, before it starts to pick up. So it's obviously been a very, very hard time for pubs.
Absolutely. And Charles.
Yeah, I was just going to echo what Andrew said, really. I mean, it's been an absolutely shocking year for everybody concerned. And I just think when we look at the impact, I don't even think we're even close to knowing quite what the full scale of the impact will be. We hope that it's just going to be damage limitation, but obviously, who knows? A lot of the damage may already be done. Who knows?
I think you're right. There's that danger, like you both said, of this not just being what happens this year, but what happens in the future as well, isn't it? And I think you also made, Andrew, you made the distinction between the first lockdown and then subsequent arrangements. Laura, you must be in a tier 3 area, is that right? How is it for you up there at the moment?
Well, we've been in Sheffield. We were in tier 3 prior to the second lockdown as well. So at that time, the rules on pubs were, I think, pretty much exactly the same as what they now are in tier 2. So our pubs have been more heavily restricted for a number of months now. So it is really difficult, and I think at the moment the bit that struck me compared to the first lockdown is like we were saying earlier, in the first lockdown it was kind of communities pulling together and very much a gung-ho attitude, and let's all get through this. And I think now the way that we came out a little bit and then have gone back in means it's more difficult for people to see the end and to know how long this is going to go on for. And I think that's something that I perceive as having knocked confidence to drinkers and to venues as well. I know certainly a lot of my favourite venues locally to me don't usually do food or have a fairly limited offering, and have kind of said it probably wouldn't be worth them opening even in tier 2. So there's still quite a long way to go before things are going to be approaching anything regarding normality. I think the positive of here is we do have very much of a community atmosphere here, and the industry as a whole, hopefully the same in other places as well as Sheffield, but certainly here, breweries, pubs, consumers, shops have all kind of helped support each other, and all kind of do what they can to keep things ticking over in some way and helping out other local businesses while they do so as well. So there is a glimmer of positivity, and I don't think the spirit of what we all do has been crushed, but it's very difficult times for sure.
I think that's right. That notion of community and supporting each other. I think we'll come back to that in a minute. But I'm kind of interested in how, like we've been saying, about how things have changed. And like you were saying, Laura, that people have changed how they drink, and how are we going to come back to that? I'm going to come to Simon and Vicki. How has this particular time changed how you drink, and how you what choices you make about buying or drinking beer?
I think for us, we were tier 2 before the latest lockdown, but we are tier 3 now, even in Warwickshire, which we kind of didn't expect. For us, a big part of drinking has always been catching the train into Brum and drinking in the more kind of progressive bars that have that kind of stuff on, because where we live, there's still quite should we say, a more traditional kind of pub culture. So for us, that kind of changed due to not really wanting to get on public transport and stuff. So we found ourselves ordering a lot more direct from breweries. And there's kind of two sides to this, really. If you want a good selection, you might be doing an online order with a bottle shop because you've got a great pick of stuff then. And then ordering direct from a brewery, though, you feel like you're supporting the brewery more. So you kind of try and do a bit of mix and match of both of those. But also, going alongside that is also what breweries and bottle shops have done to kind of change their business, as they've had to do at such short notice. And, I think 2020 has really been also the year of the mini keg or mini cask, which, kind of wasn't even really a thing, really, unless you remember from the 70s, Watney's Party 8, was it, or something like that? I was told about it. I'm not kind of that old. But yeah, stuff like that. And people at super short notice building a website, which is something that they may have been thinking about anyway, but this kind of really kind of pushed them along into doing that, which is something that they will have now for going forward to have added to their business, I think.
Absolutely. And Steve?
Just to echo what Simon says there, yeah, I think what we've seen is a lot of people move very quickly to that online business model and finding the way of getting basically their products direct to their customers, because they've had their key customers ripped out from underneath them, which is the pubs. So it's how do we get this delicious beer straight from our brewery, tasting as good as it can, straight into people's hands. And I'm guessing that Laura's probably had first-hand experience of that at Abbeydale in terms of getting your beers out to people.
Yeah, definitely. It's been a really big shift in terms of getting beer direct to the consumer as such a large part of the output for Abbeydale and for quite a number of the Sheffield based breweries as well. It was very fortunate, speaking from an Abbeydale perspective, that the canning line arrived in a very timely way early on in the first lockdown. So as with a lot of breweries, the demand for cans has shot right up, and it's great that we've been able to step in and fulfill that. But in terms of the more traditional beer side of things, it's been really good that so many breweries have been able to still offer something a little bit resembling a pub experience. I for one don't think it's anywhere near a direct replacement, but it's definitely better than nothing, and has certainly saved a lot of beer from a sad demise. So yeah, it's served a purpose, definitely. Whether mini casks will be here to stay, I'm still personally on the fence about, but we'll see. I think it would be nice that when people can go back to the pub, that beer is drank exactly as it was intended, pulled through a proper hand pump. So we'll see.
Absolutely, I'm with you there. But I think this thing about canning, and you said, Abbeydale got their canning machine just in time, and I've heard of a few other breweries who that kind of, thankfully happened just in time, or they managed to get a whole run of beer out just in time. I think one thing that's happened with me is, God, I've missed the pub hugely. But I have discovered some breweries that I hadn't drunk before because I've managed to buy them online. And it's been, like you say, getting websites up and running that people will have forever, be getting systems of getting beer delivered, getting into the swing of doing that, has really changed some of the beer that I've been drinking. So just a couple of breweries that I've drunk a lot over lockdown, which I hadn't drunk at home before, Utopian and Cheshire Brewhouse, both of whom have great cans and have done really well kind of online promoting that. Has anybody else discovered new breweries and discovered new beers that they wouldn't have drunk? Andrew?
Yeah, you stole my thunder a little bit there with the Utopian and Cheshire Brewhouse. So we're both on my list. both discoveries this year, both fantastic breweries. The beer I'm drinking now, Good Things Brewing, new to me entirely. Who else? All Day Brewing in Norfolk, hadn't heard of them before, doing sort of British wild fermentation stuff. Wilderness down in Wales, McColl's. They're all breweries that I probably wouldn't have seen in my local bottle shop or even in a local pub. But sitting at home for sort of the last 10 months, you discover a lot of beer online. And you think, well, that sounds damn tasty. And so you think, well, I definitely want to support these guys. So, I've probably had at least one box of something turn up every week during lockdown. And I try and justify it by supporting an industry in crisis. But of course, it's just because I like beer a lot. But also a lot of online retailers I've discovered for the first time. So I'm blessed with a very good local bottle shop, and I support them when I can. But equally, House of Trembling Madness in York, great online bottle shop. Rad Beer, they've been great as well. Lots of options. I think Simon mentioned it earlier. You choose sometimes because you want a deliberate mix, and that's great. But sometimes you just want to go straight to the brewer and get a selection of theirs when you can. So it's kind of been fun discovering lots of different beers. I think the shame is not being able to sit in an environment where you can maybe share and discuss those beers openly. That's what I've missed. I've got cupboards full of 750s that I'm just sitting and waiting to be able to share them with someone because they're crying out to be discussed and enjoyed together.
Steve?
Stop buying 750s then, Andrew, would be the simple answer to that one, wouldn't it? I think in terms of finds, one of the ones for me, and this actually is down to Andrew and Luke from Rhythm and Brews, is a small brewery called Simple Things Fermentations, who are based up in Glasgow, who we got to try some of their beers when we did a show with the guys back in the summer. And since then, I've just been keeping an eye on some of the things that they're putting out, and they've just released a couple of kind of seasonal specials. They've released this lovely Christmas ale and a barrel-aged stout as well, which are both right up my street. So they're certainly one that I'll be keeping an eye on in the future.
And I'm interested in how people have been drinking at home. So I've been on Zoom chats with people. But I've also managed to take part in some online events, probably with breweries that I wouldn't necessarily have been able to do that with. So I was very lucky last night in getting tasting of the New Goose Island Bourbon County Stout range, talking directly to the brewers in Chicago. That was an incredible experience that I wouldn't have had we not got these sort of online setups. But I've also done that with Utopia, and I did a taste, involved in a launch of beer with them, which was really interesting. And I wonder whether people have had those sorts of experiences, or maybe, pub quizzes that they've done, or even family stuff. Steve?
Yeah, we're involved in the Essex Bottle Share, which has been going for nearly 5 years now, and we haven't ever missed a month of getting together at the Ale House in Chelmsford to share beers. Obviously, when lockdown came in, we couldn't do that, so we took that online and we took that onto Zoom, and that's been working quite well for 9 months now. We get together on the first Tuesday of the month, and we all drink some beers, and sometimes people go on until the early hours on a Tuesday evening. But yeah, we were happy to transition to that, but I think we're beginning to get to a point now where we'd love to just see each other in person again.
Anyone else had any experiences of drinking on? Andrew, you get a box a week. Are you drinking that on your own?
Yes. No, my wife enjoys beer as well. Maybe not as much as me, but definitely if I think it's something that she would enjoy, I'm very keen that she has a taste of it to see what she thinks of it. And I'm more than happy to share. It just means I get to taste more beers because I open them more often. So I'd echo what Steve was saying about bottle shares. Our local bottle share moved online. That's been great. It's been fun keeping that going every month and trying to arrange beers that we can drink the same beer at the same time and talk about it and still have a laugh and a chat and carry on doing that. That's been great. And then the other sort of positive that's come out of this is actually meeting and talking to people that I only ever knew through social media. So you mentioned Utopian earlier. That very early on, Ruth at Utopian started sort of a Friday online drinks, Utopian, and that's been great. And it's still going every Friday. And people dip in and out when they can. But it's been fantastic actually talking to people that otherwise were just a little avatar or an icon, and and learning, and having fun time, but actually learning from people in the industry as well, and people that just enjoy beer. That's a massive positive, I think, that's come out of this.
And Laura?
I just wanted to give a quick shout out to Salford Beer Festival as well, which is always one of my favourite beer events of the year. And that was held virtually this year, and it must have been an absolute logistical feat for Jim, who's the organiser of that, who I think curated 3 different beer boxes, including a cider box, and sent them out to anybody across the country who would normally travel up to Salford and wasn't able to, and led tutored tastings throughout the weekend, managed to retain the camaraderie that the festival always has, and still achieved a £7,000 charity donation as well. So I just thought that was fantastic that he was able to kind of think about what really makes that festival and still be able to offer something to the people that were really missing it. I think as well, probably some element of virtual events will be here to stay. I think it's great that we can get involved in events from all around the country that for one reason or another we'd be prohibited from actually getting to, but it's given beer events a new type of accessibility that kind of grew from necessity, but I think is actually something that could be really positive moving forward too.
I think you're right. I think some of these things will be here to stay. Tom?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on something that I think is obviously personal to all of us, because we all do a podcast, is how we've had to change to do it. How we do our podcast is, I've always enjoyed seeing Mark and Ashley in person, drinking a beer, whether it be our local pub or one of us hosts. And I think obviously one of the big things, whether it's as events online, beer educators or podcasts, is the fact of us having to change and doing what not only we love, but also, we have listeners that enjoy, I hope they enjoy listening to our podcasts. And I think it's been fantastic. We've been able to, I know there's the big Zoom revolution and Skype for quizzes and everything. That's certainly been a big difference for us, is having to continue the podcast online, changing some of the ways we do things. But it's been something I've always looked forward to, and I didn't sort of do too many of the online beer tastings, but jumping online with Mark and Ashley has been a fantastic way for me to continue to enjoy my beers. Like Andrew said, enjoying some lovely beers on your own sometimes isn't actually the best. You don't get the best out of that beer. So being able to continue to do that over the podcast or over Zoom has been really good.
I think you've a lot of you have mentioned these things about how bringing people together and linking together, making those links together. And Laura mentioned right at the beginning of this segment about the community spirit, and I've really seen that with both pubs and with breweries reaching out to their communities, reaching out to lonely people or isolated people or vulnerable people. There's a pub here in Brighton, the Bevy, that delivered Meals on Wheels to vulnerable people throughout the first lockdown. There's various pubs and breweries have gone out of their way not only to do stuff like that, but also just to link people together. Giving pub in a box, or like you say about the Utopian, bring a place for people to come together and talk and share beer together. The most convivial drink. Also, the other bit about community that I've noticed with myself is I'm picking a lot more local stuff. I'm supporting the businesses around me that are supporting me and are supporting people near me. Has that changed for other people as well? Vicky?
Yeah, but change for the positive. I think we are. I mean, we've always, certainly from the beer industry, we've always supported local, haven't we? Yeah. But just in general, I think we've just definitely done that whole thing of let's try and shop more local and all that kind of thing. What I found very interesting, just moving slightly on from that about this whole chat, is it's been very interesting that we've all been talking about personally. We've all changed or it's what it's done to our drinking habits, etc. But going back to what we were saying about that whole hospitality and what will a lot of our local pubs survive, and how will they adapt moving forward? And yes, as you've just said, Emma, a lot of them have, certainly locally, we've had they're doing all the meals, they're doing all that sort of thing. They haven't necessarily been able to provide drinks, but yes, they've been able to do the online takeaway meals and things. But it's going to be really interesting to see how they move forward in the next few years. And will table service become will be in 5 years' time, is table service that'll be the new norm in 5 years' time sort of thing. And, so yes, come back in 2025 and we'll see whether that's still there.
Absolutely. It's hard to know what of these changes are going to stay, isn't it? But I think it's a good place to move on to our next topic about where we do drink and where we're going to drink in the future. So where do people drink? Where's your favourite place to drink? Where's your perfect place to have a beer?
Too obvious to say my local pub. 8 months ago, no, 10 months ago, where are we now? It started in March, didn't it, when we couldn't go to pubs? So we're about 10 or 9 months in. Yeah, I've got some fantastic locals. I live in a town that's blessed with really good pubs. So I could pick easily one of half a dozen, or I could have previously picked one of half a dozen. So yeah, a pub, it's going to be a pub, a not too busy pub, preferably a pub where I can sit and enjoy good beer at my own pace. And it's nice and warm. And there's enough of a buzz to it without it being too busy. But latterly, over the last 9 months, what has it been? It's been largely at home, grabbing the opportunities to go and support local pubs when I can. But always conscious, I think like a lot of drinkers, I'm just conscious I potentially don't want to be going to pubs as often as I might like to. So going is a deliberate attempt on my part, I think, to support them and then actually try and recapture a bit of what was going on before. Because I think something that's been lost is the whole spontaneity about drinking as well. I do miss that, whether it's after work or at a weekend. You might have been for a walk or you've done something, or you just think, or you might phone a mate and go, do you want to meet up for a drink? Lost all of that. I'm looking forward to that coming back eventually. So, but it's sad that seems to have gone for the last 9 or 10 months.
I think you're right. I think that's a really good way of putting it, that loss of spontaneity that we get from a pub on each corner being open, isn't it? Martin?
Sort of echo what Andrew was saying there. It's definitely, where do we drink now is becoming my least favourite place because it's becoming a bit more enforced. That's not the company or the quality of beers I'm allowed to drink at home and enjoy at home and share at home. It is the go down to the pub for a pint, whether that be a local or pub in London or pub anywhere in the country that I happen to love. That bit is just gone. And the spontaneity bit, I hadn't really given that much thought actually. And I think that is a massive thing as well. Just that I walk past one, I've got enough time, I can pop in for one. That's sort of gone, especially now, given that for a large swathe of the country, you can't even go in and get a drink wherever you're eating a massive meal or not. And for the other part of the country, you have to think about having some food as well. So the spontaneity bit, I'd almost forgotten about the spontaneity bit. I don't think probably since mid-March there's been much spontaneous going on in my life. Most things are planned around work, calls, the pleasure of doing this kind of thing, the pleasure of doing the Beer O'Clock show, recording with Steve, meeting other people online, all that kind of stuff. But the actual just option to just literally walk out your house, walk from work, or go and just pop in somewhere. You don't pop anywhere now. And I'm missing cask beer. As much as the mini kegs got mentioned, the mini casks, for me, it's still not quite the same. Because it's not being pulled through a hand pull, as Laura mentioned, whether that be sparkled or unsparkled, but maybe that's a whole different conversation one day. And just, you can't quite replicate the cask beer. There's been some fantastic conditioned beers I've had at home over the last 8 or 9 months from some superb breweries. You mentioned one of them earlier with Cheshire Brew House, but it's still not the same as having a pint of beer in a pub. And I have to admit, I think that sort of mythical version of the pub, that moon underwater, is almost becoming my ideal location right now. The more I can't go to one, the more I want it to be the pub I go to. So yeah, pubs and cask beer, I can't replicate those. I miss them.
I think what you're saying there about the more we don't have it, the more we miss it. And I think that's definitely true for cask ale, isn't it, Ashley?
I think on a similar note, there's something about my enjoyment of drinking at home is diminished by the fact that I never leave here. You know, it's almost as though if you lived at the pub, that you probably wouldn't get the same enjoyment drinking there. Because I don't go to work. Well, I work, but I work from home. So I work in a different room of the house, and that's about as much commuting as I do. There's never that feeling of, it's about 4:30, so I'll get the train in a bit, and I've got that session IPA in the fridge. I'm looking forward to that. There's none of that anymore. It's almost as though I feel a bit guilty for having that session IPA because I've actually just walked from my study to the fridge rather than got the train home or doing anything like that. So I think that the helpful thing for me is that, I mean, my favorite place is to drink at home, and the soppy answer for that is because that's where my wife and my 8-month-old son are. So, you know, that's the kind of soppy answer. The actual answer clearly is the beer house in Market Harborough, is my favorite place to drink because it's the place that we mention on every single episode we do ever, because they've always got 20 lines, they've always got a range, they've always got light, dark, in between, low alcohol, high alcohol, all of those sorts of things. So, you know, that was a huge part of beginning our beer journey, was that place that had so much variety that you couldn't not find something that you liked there. So I think there's just something about the whole experience is dulled by the fact that we're being pigeonholed into certain ways of drinking and certain places that we can drink. And so any foray outside of that, like those periods of time where we weren't in lockdown, felt so liberating because we could go to places and we could do things, and that spontaneity returned. I was able to text Tom and say, should we just pop for a beer on Saturday? All of those kind of things returned, and it felt like such an immense moment. And now we're kind of back into lockdown again. So it feels like we're reining ourselves back. So I just feel there's something about this roller coaster of freedoms being given and taken and returning that means that we're always in a state of flux about the things that we can and can't look forward to. So I just think as soon as you lose something, you pine for it.
Absolutely, I think that's exactly right. And I think, you know, before all this nightmare happened, there's been a gradual decline in pubs, a gradual decline in drinking cask ale over a few years. There was a slight uptick at the end of last year, beginning of this year, before, you know, the calamity. But you know, people have been appreciating them less and less over the past few years, it would seem, until now. And now, you know, you, particularly in the first lockdown, you couldn't switch on the radio or read a paper without some mention of people missing pubs. That hasn't unfortunately translated into financial support for pubs and breweries, but the public kind of longing for them has really has really been apparent. Do you think that will translate into people valuing cask ale more, valuing the place where cask ale is served more? Andrew, you're shaking your head.
No, definitely not. I don't think cask ale was valued before, and I think it will be valued even less. Well, it maybe not valued. Maybe it's the wrong word. It's a difficult situation, isn't it? Because cask ale is a particular product, isn't it? It's a live product. It's brewed to be drunk at a certain time, and it only lasts for a certain time. So when you have this whole situation with pubs opening, closing, restrictions on how many people they're coming in, it's difficult for brewers to know how and when to brew. It's difficult for pubs to know when to buy it and get it in. So what you're inevitably going to see is the availability of it falling, I think, and pubs less inclined to stock it because they can't guarantee they can serve it. And so if that then starts to become a vicious cycle where I think certain brewers that might have wanted to do it are less inclined to. The brewers that do it as a staple of their output might brew less of it. I don't know. I think it's cask was obviously already in a decline, and I think that's partly because it has an image problem, and it is massively undervalued, and I don't necessarily see that returning.
Laura, what were your thoughts?
It's a really tricky one. I mean, I'm the kind of person that never really, you know, I didn't personally see cask beer as declining in my own mind, if that makes sense. For me, the kind of difference is I would always go to the pub more specifically to drink cask beer. So when lockdown hit, actually, we kind of went to our cellar to go and find something to drink at home. And we were like, we've got a cellar full of mixed fermentation and imperial stouts. You know, we've got nothing sessionable here, because if we want something that we want to drink a few pints of, we go to the pub. So that kind of shift into needing to find that type of beer to drink and enjoy at home was quite big for us, really. Although we did manage to make a considerable dent in the we started calling them Christmas Day Thursdays because they were all the beers that you save up for Christmas and then never get round to drinking them, and we were like, oh, might as well just have this. But I think with the cask side of things, I'd like to think of things put a little bit more of a positive spin on. I think people have already kind of attached a certain nostalgia to cask beer, even though it's only been a small amount of time that we haven't been able to access it in, the form that it's intended to be drunk. And I would really hope that kind of spurs on a bit of a resurgence when the pubs are able to open. That's what people have really missed. When the first lockdown ended, we went to the Sheffield Tap at the train station and had a pint of cask Jaipur, and it was one of the best things I've ever drank. It was absolutely fantastic. And we very much made a point of drinking that type of beer that day. Whether that will be a kind of short-term thing and people will then, sort of look to experiment a bit more widely, I don't know. I think there's still so much to be seen. I think Andrew's right in that I think breweries that were kind of cask-led will possibly look to be a little bit more flexible with their output as well. There's so many breweries that have adapted, and it almost makes sense for them to be able to continue reaching out to more people in more different formats. But I hope that it's in addition to cask rather than as a replacement for cask, if that makes sense.
Simon, do you think the way that you've changed to drink, I think you were also in tier 3 drinking at home, is that going to continue, do you think? For once the pubs are back open, do you think your drinking habits have changed for good, or do you think
I don't think they've changed
as much?
Yeah, I don't think they've changed for good, because like everybody else, I'm hankering for a return to the pub to drink great quality cask beer. And my fear is, well, there's two sides to this really. Either we've all missed great cask beer that much that there'll be a huge resurgence in it when things start to return to normal, or the danger is that some places, not through their own fault really, but because there's not enough throughput, will be serving maybe not the best cask beer, which potentially puts people off even more, because perhaps they want to maintain more lines than what's best, and maybe it should be actually a good idea to just kind of like have 2 lines during the time when perhaps people are starting to find their feet and be more comfortable going to the pub. And this is maybe down to just personal choice of, am I comfortable going back? This is going to take a real amount of work for some people, depending on their state of mind, to feel comfortable in a crowded pub again. I think we've had to change our mindset mega quick back in March, and we've gradually got used to this kind of keeping away from people thing. And I hope that when pubs are safe to visit again, and everyone's going to feel okay with just being in a crowded pub like it used to be, ordering up a pint of cask beer and going, wow, that's damn good, I've missed this, let's get through it, let's have a few pints of it, and that hopefully there is if not a complete resurgence of cask beer, that it doesn't lose any ground more than what it already was doing. That's what I hope for anyway.
And Martin?
I'd just like to add, I think Simon's right, and I think it may have been mentioned earlier by Andrew as well. I think there are going to be a section of society who, it's not always going to be about COVID. I think they'll have got used to drinking at home. They'll have got used to some of the value of drinking at home. You can order a nice takeout by literally pressing a couple of buttons on your phone. You can have that really nice beers, nice wine. Because let's remember, the pub needs to survive on more than just a beer, which we all like drinking. There's plenty of other things the pub needs to do and needs to sell to make it worthwhile. So I think there are some people who've got out of habit. I've had Teams meetings at work where people are literally not talking about wanting to go out and have said, yeah, we're quite happy. But let's face it, the amount of programs you can now stream. If you just want to be on the sofa, if you run out of entertainment, it's probably more about you than the entertainment offerings available at not a massive cost, in my opinion, because how much you may spend elsewhere in your entertainment. So I think hospitality, to make it a little bit wider, is going to have to work really hard to attract people. But what I do hope is that the quality aspect isn't lost. So echoing what Laura said, that cask doesn't sort of get pulled back, but also talking about value, cask itself as a product is still an undervalued product. And I personally would happily pay more. And I know that's not the same for everyone. And referencing Steve's earlier comment, spoons in 2015, spoons 2020, I was a fan of spoons in days gone by. Two things have changed my mind on that. One is Brexit, and the second one is that they don't put monetary value on cask. And I know that there is a section of the country who need that aspect of it, but they also don't seem to give any hint that there's a cost behind what they're doing, a bit like supermarkets, I suppose, in some respects. So I think we need more on that. There's definitely an educational piece there as well. I do fear for hospitality going forward, and I think it may be late 21, 22 where we start to see the full impact of this. But people may just got out of the habit of going. I think we'll all rush back and do our best. Just not sure everyone else will.
And I think as beer lovers and podcasters or writers, we've got a role in that, haven't we, in supporting hospitality. Ashley.
Yeah, and actually, you've touched on a point that I was going to raise there, and it goes on the back of what Martin was saying there. I think that the quality of beer across all dispense methods is so good now that it actually does reduce the likelihood of people missing cask to that significant extent. And actually, because we can get such great quality in bottles and in cans, it makes people less likely to suddenly feel like, right, pubs are open, I've got to go back for cask. Because actually, if you've had 9 months of having really good bottles and cans, you might as well stay doing bottles and cans. But the point that you've started touching on there is the role that I think we all have, to a greater or lesser extent. I'm fully aware that Tom, Mark and I are sort of, small fish in a big pond here. But, there is something about reminding people about cask and just shoving it into their faces to say, actually, we're at a point now where if we don't fully re-engage with this, there is a distinct likelihood that we lose it forever. Because if it isn't a viable model for pubs and for bars and for restaurants and whatever else, then they just won't do it. They will just go with other dispense methods and that will be it. And we'll all be broadly okay with it because the quality is good, but there will always be that reflection in the back of our minds about, well, actually, if I'd have just had a few more pints, if we'd have all gone out for a few more pints of cask, we could have just caused that tipping point. So there's something like, whether it's #AskForCask or something like that, there's some kind of movement that's needed just to make sure that when everyone is able to go back to normal, then we are looking for cask first, just to say, if the options there are something I'm happy to go for, then I'll go for that ahead of anything else. We're not saying go for things you don't like just to try and save cask, but if the options are there are just as good, if not better than the others, then why not go for cask for that longevity? So yeah,
excellent. I love the hashtag. I love the hashtag.
Yeah, I'm really pleased with it. I'm definitely going to
see it
later.
We're going to move on in a second, but Andrew, quickly.
I was just to echo that. I love the whole. If only I'd had a few more pints, I could have saved cask. I'm gonna use that. If only I'd had a few more pints. But it's the quintessential sessionable drink, isn't it? It's what a pub is all about, isn't it? You sit there, and it tastes good enough that you like it, but not so good or challenging that you're thinking too much about it, because you're there because either you're enjoying the pub environment or you're enjoying being with friends. The beer starts to become secondary, and I don't want to undermine the beer there. Good beer is important, but it's part of the whole experience. And so that cask ale, I mean, I seek it out whenever I get a chance to go to a pub now, just because I think A, I haven't had it for a while, B, I'm having those extra pints on behalf of the sector.
Excellent. So looking ahead to this future with hospitality, but we've been skirting around this next issue a little bit already about supermarkets. So about where we've talked about ordering beer online, either directly from breweries or from bottle shops who are doing great online offerings at the moment. But a lot of people get their beer from the supermarket. Since, Steve, it'd be interesting to come to you first. I think when you were talking about you did this similar sort of session in 2015. How has the supermarket offering changed since 2015?
Oh, it's unrecognisable, really. Back in 2015, I think probably all you could get in a supermarket was Punk IPA in terms of craft beer. I don't think there were any. That there were certainly none of the big UK breweries that you now see in there. It was all about the regional sort of family breweries and what they could offer. There were very, very few cans on the shelves. Unless you're talking about obviously the big 24 packs of cans that you can buy from a supermarket, but we're not. It's a completely different environment now.
It's, I think, one of the things that's really interesting is, I mean, you say Punk IPA, don't forget a bit of Frawley and a bit of I don't know, some dodgy, very commercial Belgian beers as well. But I love the fact that now it's just completely blown out, right? And you've got, not only do you have amazing craft brewers in your Tesco, your Morrisons, your Waitrose, sadly not Sainsbury's, but you've actually got local breweries. I know Tesco have been doing a lot to get local breweries in local supermarkets and doing work. And I think that it's fantastic as an entry point into beer, and especially with the way that they're even, you know, in the last year or two broadening out their styles a lot. So you've got Berliner Weisses, you've got Imperial Pastry Stouts, you've got, I mean, Overworks, Brewdog have started to do their Overworks range in supermarkets now too. It's fantastic for the consumer.
Absolutely. Yeah, go on.
I was just going to say, for the brewery, I mean, we've had a chat with some folks about this. And it's good to get out to more consumers, but I suppose there is that question of, it's the same with Wetherspoons as well. It's like supermarkets are also driving the prices down for breweries. So I know when we were talking to Wildcard in our long-lost famous episode that never got aired, they were talking about they were really excited to go into Tesco, but at the same time they were selling it at, like, you know, pennies compared to what they would if they were going through their tap room, which I suppose is that trade-off that you make. But that's, I suppose, the question, right? Is it ultimately a good thing?
And you're coming down on this is really good for consumers. Anybody disagree with that? Anybody think that the amount of beer in supermarkets is not so good? Charles?
Yeah, I mean, I'm slightly on the fence with the whole supermarket sort of craft beer kind of thing, really. I think on one hand, it's obviously great that we've got this amazing selection available, you know, on our doorstep, but you know, don't forget the independent shops that we've trusted and used over the last several years. You know, how much business is that taken away from them? I mean, that's the question I'd kind of ask. But yeah, it's an interesting, you know, situation. I think, as you said, we don't want to get into this sort of race to the bottom, as it were, but I think that's going to be an inevitable possibility, I guess. I don't know.
And when you say that, what is it you mean by that race to the bottom? What is this in terms of price or in terms of quality?
I guess it's a range of things. I mean, obviously, you know, the amount of breweries that we're now seeing, sort of craft breweries that we always considered to be, you know, hugely independent and never going to look to the supermarket as a route of getting the beers out. Yeah, it's just whether or not, you know, the quality is going to sort of drop as a result of the amount that's out there, I guess.
And I know there's occasionally Facebook groups might comment on sort of not allowing kind of beers that you can get in supermarkets onto their groups or whatever. Is there a view that we somehow the beer available in supermarkets is not as good as beer anywhere else?
I think what we've seen, I mean, I think I can see both. I can see sort of, you know, craft breweries such as, I don't know, for example, Northern Monk would sort of spring to mind. You know, they've got a fabulous core range, which sits really well actually in the supermarket. But as long as they can offer an alternative range that can sit in the independent shops, that's maybe more flavor driven, higher ABV, something that's a point of difference, I think is crucial, really, and it allows it to sort of coexist. Really, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah. Martin, what were your thoughts?
If I look at beer as just another consumable product, then most consumers do the bulk of their shopping at supermarkets. Every now and again, they may go to the baker's to get some bread, whether that be for a special occasion or visitors coming round. or you may go to the local butchers to get a particular cut of meat. And we can't put the genie back in the bottle. The beers which were in the supermarkets prior to, say, Punk turning up, they're still there. They're not going away. The regional beers aren't going away. And what we term as craft isn't going away. We race to the bottom. Well, that would be down to the breweries who put their beers in the supermarkets more than the supermarkets. The supermarket, everyone knows how a supermarket works. Those conversations have been taking place for years, even if you just go back to looking at dairy farmers. But milk still gets sold into supermarkets. We don't want to be elitist about the product we like. And I think that's really important. And some of those breweries that are in there now, you know, Buxton put in a beer into Tesco, Storm Shadow, 8% stout, which even a couple of years ago, if you'd said that was going to land on a Tesco shelf 3 miles away from me, I would have used quite a few words, which, you know, is pretty unrepeatable, to be honest. But yeah, will supermarkets look after it as we want them to? Maybe, maybe not. But we're a small percentage of who the supermarkets are selling to when all's said and done. There's a load of people out there who will not give it the second's thought. They're probably not even thinking about checking dates on the bottom of cans, which until the current crisis we're in, I was definitely prone to doing in supermarkets because their rotation on shelves is shockingly bad, especially M&S. So, you know, I think on the whole, it's a good thing. There are sections of the country where you can't get beers. And I know everyone says online shopping, but my parents in their mid-70s aren't going to do online beer shopping. But every now and again, I'll get a WhatsApp from my mum who says, you know, they picked up something that they saw in the supermarket and she thought it was worth mentioning to me. And it's not a regional beer. It's beer which they may have heard me mention when we were out together. So I think that's a good thing on the whole. I agree with what Charles said about independent beer shops, whether that be online or physical, that you still want them to have a place. You still want them to have access to beers which perhaps can't get anywhere else. You know, whether it be like Sean with Beer Central, you know, Jules in Sheffield. You want them to have those beers which you can only get one of. Sometimes I don't want to do 4 for £6 or 4 for £7, or go online and order 24 beers just to make sure I don't pay the postage. Sometimes I still want to be able to walk into the shop, talk to someone, pick up maybe just 2 or 3, and if they've got, you know, a couple of taps, maybe a growler or something as well. So my hope with regard to supermarkets is that you make more people aware, but you don't kill off other sections of what we love about the beer community.
Absolutely. I think it's a fine balance, isn't it? And I think that's what we're picking up on, that need to support independence. But like you say, the supermarkets give accessibility to people who don't have an independent near them or who only have a tenner in their pocket, aren't able to order online. Can't get anything for a tenner, can you? It's just the delivery. But you could go into the supermarket and buy yourself maybe 4 really nice beers. Tom?
Just one thing Martin just mentioned there about sort of talking to someone. And I know that people who work at supermarkets can't be experts on absolutely everything they sell, but it's one thing I've not actually thought about is, you know, I have bought beers in supermarkets, is what would, if I asked about certain beers or the range they have, would they actually provide any good, decent sort of feedback and information on them? Whereas, you know, recently I went into Duncan Murray's Wines, which is a fantastic shop in Market Harbour, and the amount of knowledge they had on the wines and the beers, and I know that's their trade, but it was so enjoyable just actually listening to them tell me about the beers and the wine I wanted to buy my mum and dad for Christmas, and it was just, that experience is a lot better. And I know people sort of, they may go to independents to search for that, but I think also, you know, it would with craft beer being sold in the supermarkets, is there a bit of disservice to those beers sometimes where, you know, when they want that information, they're just not getting it and they turned away by it. And it's just a point I've not really thought about. I didn't know if you guys had a take on it, but I think it's something that certainly a supermarket you would miss out on, is that sort of knowledge on those beers.
I think you're right, and I think I like that comparison. You know, Martin was talking about, we used to go to the, you know, the bakers, we just go to the butchers, the you know, the greengrocers or whatever. Now we do our shopping all in one. But I guess I see supermarkets as you can buy beer there, you can buy bread there, you can buy nice coffee there. But if I want that other experience and to get something different and unusual and talk to somebody, I would go to a specialist coffee shop, or I'd go to a specialist baker's to buy some unusual sourdough, sure. Or I'd go to a specialist beer shop to get that information. And perhaps there's room for both without one squeezing out the other, but the danger is money talks, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Adam?
There's so many different threads on that I try and keep in my head, but I'm going to keep a fresh one instead rather than sort of echo what everyone else has said. And a lot of podcasts, you talk about beer journeys and things like that, and you got to remember that there's not many people's beer journeys that are going to start in a specialist beer shop that's, you know, you've made a special effort to go to. So, you know, to having something of good quality that is almost an advertisement for that brewery in a supermarket is really important. Not everyone has the money to be able to do this. You know, if you're really into beer and you drink a lot, you know, whatever a lot is, you know, 4 cans from a specialist shop, you know, you're talking well over £20 sometimes. And people who are new on their journey or are used to spending maybe £5 on 4 cans, you're not going to convert them people unless they're really, you know, they've had that experience. And I'll put my hand up. I use a supermarket. I do, and you can't spend that much money on it. You need something as a kind of not a special occasion, something that's good quality beer. And you know, these breweries have chosen to put these things in supermarkets. They've not been forced to do it. And I know that, like, it does cause headaches for when you start seeing Thornbridge core range in specialist shops when you know that you can get it, you know, 8 cans for £9, you know, of Jaipur. You know, that's insane. And to be honest, I've probably drunk more Jaipur during lockdown than I ever have, and I've drunk a lot of Jaipur. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the other points that play echo, really. I think mainly that one being that having that kind of maybe some sort of core range in supermarkets, and then you're going to have to go to a specialist shop or somewhere, or direct. And it's basically that's the advert for that brewery in the supermarket there.
So, Luke, you wanted to come in there.
Yeah, I think you nailed it there, right? It's the specialist beer shops. They're serving a different function. They're for people at different point in their beer journey, and I suppose, and actually, when you think about it, independent beer shops, and I know my local beer shop in Hitchin, which is a great little bottle shop, can be quite intimidating to somebody who doesn't know anything about beer. Because they walk in there and you've got these, unfortunately as well, predominantly white male dudes behind the bar, who, you know, are very good if you can get past that initial snobby barrier. It reminds me of High Fidelity and, like, the, you know, walking in and asking for Stevie Wonder and getting yelled at. And I suppose that would serve, and the only problem is if what happens to books happens to beer, where it's with Amazon coming in and completely... pushing out all the independent booksellers, and now you just don't have anywhere near as many. But I do feel like there is space. I think the thing is that beer shops just need to up their quality, and they need to make sure they're actually serving the need that they're trying to serve, and not trying to serve everyone, and actually, you know, differentiating and doing something different.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, really, what kind of echoing what Luke's just said there. I think there is still a, you know, sort of almost a fear factor for someone that's new to the scene, walking into a bottle shop, as friendly as the staff normally majority of the time are. It's still can be a bit daunting. You know, you just see shelves and shelves of bottles and mainly cans these days. And, you know, if you're new, it's like, am I buying the right thing? Is this too much to spend on a beer? Whereas obviously in a supermarket, you know, no one's bothering you, no one's judging, nobody judges you, but no one's sort of looking at you. You've got time. You're not sort of blocking someone's sort of, you know, experience in a bottle shop. So, yeah, there's definitely still a sort of intimidation factor potentially for sort of new people into the scene.
Absolutely, yeah. I think we have to remember that, don't we, as we're way down our beer journeys.